My daughter said I was too old-fashioned, too stuck in tradition, and too set in my ways to understand modern celebrations. So she hijacked every holiday, dismissed our family customs, and treated our generational traditions like outdated relics that embarrassed her sophisticated lifestyle. But I wasn't stuck in the past. I wasn't irrelevant. While she thought my traditions were expired decorations she could discard, I was planning to show her what holidays look like when the person who created all her magical memories decides those memories no longer deserve to be made. I raised Amanda with Christmas mornings that began before dawn, Easter egg hunts that turned our backyard into wonderlands, Thanksgiving tables that groaned under the weight of recipes passed down from my grandmother's grandmother. Every holiday was a masterpiece of love and labor, weeks of planning and preparation designed to create the kind of childhood memories that would sustain her through whatever difficulties life might bring. I hand-stitched stockings, spent days baking cookies from scratch, and turned our modest home into seasonal magic that neighbors would drive by just to admire. After her father passed away when she was 12, holidays became even more important to us. They were anchors in the storm of grief, predictable celebrations that proved life could still hold joy even after devastating loss. I worked extra shifts at the department store to afford the perfect gifts, stayed up until midnight wrapping presents in paper I'd save and reuse for years, and made sure Amanda never felt like losing her father meant losing the magic of childhood celebrations. Amanda loved it all when she was young. She'd wake me up at 5 in the morning on Christmas, insist on helping with Thanksgiving preparations even when her help meant I had to redo everything she touched, and invite school friends to see our elaborate Halloween decorations. She understood that holidays weren't just dates on calendars but celebrations of family, continuity, and the precious traditions that connected us to generations of women who'd loved their families enough to create beauty in ordinary moments. When Amanda graduated college and moved to the city, I assumed she'd want to recreate our traditions in her own home, maybe adding her own touches while maintaining the foundation I'd built. I imagined future holidays where she'd tell her children about their grandmother's famous sugar cookies, where she'd use my mother's china to serve Christmas dinner, where the traditions I'd preserved would continue flowing like a river through generations. I thought I'd raised a daughter who understood that some things are worth keeping exactly as they've always been because they're perfect in their original form. But success and sophisticated friends changed Amanda's perspective on our family celebrations. She started talking about our traditions like they were charming but embarrassing remnants of a simpler time, quaint customs that didn't fit with her new lifestyle and educated social circle. What had once been magical became outdated in her eyes, and the woman who'd been raised on handmade Christmas stockings began to see store-bought convenience as an upgrade rather than a loss. The first betrayal came during Amanda's third Christmas in her new apartment. She'd invited me to spend the holiday with her instead of hosting our traditional celebration at my house, promising it would be just as special but updated for modern life. When I arrived, I found a silver aluminum tree with blue lights, catered appetizers instead of homemade cookies, and gifts wrapped in identical silver paper by some professional service. "Isn't this elegant, Mom?" Amanda asked, gesturing around her minimalist living room that looked like a magazine spread rather than a home. "I thought we could try something more contemporary this year. All those homemade decorations and traditional recipes are so much work and honestly they're a bit outdated." She said outdated, like our traditions were expired milk rather than precious heirlooms that had taken decades to perfect. When I asked about the stockings I'd hand-stitched for her when she was 5, she waved dismissively toward a mantle lined with matching silver stockings from some expensive boutique. "Those old ones are cute, but they don't really fit my decor. These are more sophisticated." I spent that Christmas feeling like a museum visitor in my own daughter's celebration, watching her serve store-bought everything while explaining to her friends how quaint her mother's old-fashioned approach to holidays had been. The second betrayal happened at Easter. For 30 years I'd hosted Easter dinner for our extended family, serving ham with my grandmother's glaze recipe, rolls that took me 2 days to make properly, and desserts that required ingredients I'd special order weeks in advance. Amanda called 2 weeks before Easter to announce she was taking over the dinner and moving it to her apartment. "Mom, I've hired a caterer who specializes in modern interpretations of traditional meals. It'll be so much easier than all that cooking, and the presentation will be much more elegant than the usual family-style serving. She made our traditional Easter dinner sound like a church potluck rather than a carefully orchestrated celebration that had brought our family together for 3 decades. When Easter arrived, I found myself sitting at a formal dining table eating deconstructed ham with artisanal this and organic that, while Amanda explained to our relatives how she'd elevated our traditional menu. The caterer's ham was perfectly prepared but tasted like expensive nothing compared to the recipe my grandmother had perfected during the Depression. Our family members were polite but confused, clearly missing the familiar foods and relaxed atmosphere that had made Easter feel like home. The third betrayal was the most devastating because it involved Amanda's engagement party. She was marrying Richard, a successful lawyer who shared her preference for sophisticated entertaining over family traditions. When Amanda announced they were having an engagement party, I naturally assumed I'd help plan it, the way mothers and daughters had been celebrating engagements in our family for generations. Instead, Amanda informed me that she'd hired a wedding planner and that the party would be a modern cocktail celebration, with no connection to our family's traditional approach to marking life's milestones. Mom, I know you love all those old-fashioned touches, but Richard and I want something more contemporary. His family is very sophisticated and I want to make a good impression. Once again, our traditions were positioned as embarrassments rather than treasures, obstacles to overcome rather than foundations to build upon. The breaking point came when Amanda announced her wedding plans. After 33 years of celebrating every milestone with carefully preserved family traditions, I naturally assumed I'd play a central role in planning the most important celebration of her life. I'd been dreaming of Amanda's wedding since she was born, imagining how I'd incorporate my grandmother's lace, my mother's pearls, and decades of saved decorations into a celebration that honored both our past and her future. But Amanda had different ideas. Mom, Richard and I have hired Charlotte Webb as our wedding planner. She's the best in the city, and she specializes in contemporary celebrations. We want something elegant and sophisticated, not all that traditional stuff you love. I hope you understand. She said it casually, like she was informing me about a change in dinner plans rather than excluding me from the most important event in her life. When I asked about incorporating family traditions, my grandmother's wedding dress that I'd preserved in tissue paper for 30 years, the unity candle ceremony that had been part of our family weddings for 4 generations, the reception traditions that had celebrated love in our family since before Amanda was born, she actually laughed. Mom, those things are so dated. Charlotte says modern brides are moving away from all that old-fashioned symbolism. We want our wedding to reflect who we are now, not who our great-grandmothers were. The conversation that followed revealed the depth of Amanda's rejection of everything I'd tried to give her. She didn't want my grandmother's dress because it wasn't designer enough. She didn't want traditional vows because she and Richard had written their own more personal version. She didn't want the reception meal I'd been planning since she was 12 because the country club caterer offered more sophisticated options. Amanda, I said carefully, these traditions aren't just old-fashioned decorations. They're connections to the women who loved you before you were born, celebrations of the family that created you, acknowledgments of the generations of love that brought you to this moment. But she was already shaking her head, dismissing decades of preserved tradition as irrelevant sentiment. Mom, I appreciate what those things meant to you and your generation, but they don't represent who I am or what I want my life to look like. I'm not you, and I'm not going to pretend to be just to honor some outdated customs that don't fit with modern life. Her words hit me like physical blows, each dismissal carving away pieces of my heart that I'd thought were safely protected by maternal love. That night, I sat in my bedroom surrounded by boxes of Christmas decorations, Easter linens, and wedding keepsakes that I'd been saving for Amanda's future celebrations. 3 decades of careful preservation, of maintaining family treasures through multiple moves and financial struggles, of keeping traditions alive that connected us to women who'd faced wars, depressions, and losses but had never stopped believing in the importance of marking life's important moments with beauty and intention. Amanda had rejected it all. Not just individual traditions but the entire concept that the past had value worth preserving. She decided that everything I'd given her was outdated, embarrassing, insufficient for the sophisticated life she wanted to build. In that moment, something fundamental shifted in my understanding of our relationship. If Amanda thought our family traditions were worthless, then maybe it was time for her to discover what holidays looked like without the foundation I'd spent her entire life building. The next morning, I began packing away every holiday decoration, every special dish, every carefully preserved family heirloom that I'd been maintaining for Amanda's future use. If she thought our traditions were outdated embarrassments, then she could create her own celebrations from scratch without any connection to the foundation I'd provided. I wasn't angry in the dramatic, explosive way people expect from family conflicts. I was coldly determined in the way that only comes when someone you love has systematically devalued everything you've tried to give them. I called my lawyer, Margaret Foster, who'd helped me with various legal matters over the years. "Margaret, I need to make some changes to my will in light of recent conversations with my daughter," I said calmly. "Amanda has made it very clear that our family traditions are outdated and irrelevant to her modern life. I want to make sure my estate reflects her preferences." Margaret was professional enough not to ask probing questions, but I could hear the concern in her voice as she scheduled an appointment to discuss the changes. Over the next few weeks, I began systematically documenting Amanda's rejection of our family traditions. Not to build a legal case, but to remind myself that this decision was based on consistent patterns rather than momentary hurt feelings. Every dismissive comment about our old-fashioned celebrations. Every time she'd chosen sophisticated alternatives over meaningful family customs. Every instance where she'd treated our generational traditions like embarrassing relics rather than precious gifts. I also started reaching out to other family members who'd been affected by Amanda's modernization of our celebrations. My sister Dorothy, who'd been excluded from holiday planning because Amanda found her contributions too traditional. My cousin Helen, whose famous apple pie had been replaced by artisanal desserts that tasted like expensive cardboard. Various aunts, uncles, and family friends who'd been marginalized as Amanda transformed our inclusive family celebrations into exclusive, sophisticated events. What I discovered was that I wasn't the only one who felt displaced by Amanda's changes. Our entire extended family had been watching their connections to holiday traditions gradually severed as Amanda prioritized appearance over meaning, sophistication over sentiment, professional presentation over personal connection. They'd been polite about the changes, but privately they mourned the loss of the celebrations that had once brought our family together in meaningful ways. I began making plans to redirect my holiday energy toward people who actually valued family traditions. Dorothy and I started discussing the possibility of recreating our childhood Christmas celebrations at her house, using the decorations and recipes Amanda had rejected. Helen offered to host Easter dinner using our grandmother's china and traditional menu that Amanda had replaced with catered modernizations. These women understood that traditions weren't outdated obstacles but precious links to the generations of family members who'd invested their love in creating lasting celebrations. I started by quietly removing myself from Amanda's wedding planning process entirely. When she called with updates about venue selections or menu tastings, I responded with polite interest but no emotional investment. "That sounds lovely, dear," became my standard response to everything from dress fittings to floral arrangements. I was giving her exactly the emotional distance she'd been requesting through her systematic rejection of family involvement in her celebrations. The first test came when Amanda expected me to host her bridal shower. For months, I'd been planning a traditional shower that would honor both her upcoming marriage and our family's history of celebrating brides with meaningful gifts and time-honored customs. When Amanda called to discuss details, I calmly explained that I wouldn't be hosting the shower after all. "What do you mean you won't be hosting it? Mom, you always host family showers. It's tradition." The irony was breathtaking. Amanda suddenly wanted to invoke tradition when it served her needs, after spending months dismissing every tradition I'd tried to preserve. "You're right, it is tradition," I said evenly. But you've made it very clear that our family traditions are outdated and irrelevant. I'm just respecting your preferences by not imposing old-fashioned customs on your modern celebration." The confusion in her voice was palpable as she tried to process this unexpected development. "Mom, that's different. This is just a shower, not some elaborate traditional ceremony. I still want you to host it." But I held firm, explaining that I couldn't selectively honor traditions that she'd spent months systematically rejecting. She ended up having to ask Richard's mother to host the shower, which resulted in exactly the kind of impersonal, sophisticated event she claimed to prefer. The second phase involved redirecting all my holiday preparation energy toward people who actually appreciated family traditions. Instead of spending weeks preparing for Amanda's wedding-related celebrations, I began planning a massive family reunion that would honor our traditions without her involvement. I reached out to relatives we hadn't seen in years, inviting them to a celebration of our family heritage that would feature all the customs Amanda had rejected. Dorothy and I spent afternoons going through boxes of family photographs, recipes, and decorations that told the story of our family's approach to celebrations. We planned menus that honored our grandmother's cooking, decorations that showcased 4 generations of handmade holiday crafts, and activities that would help younger family members understand the history behind our traditions. It was like planning the anti-Amanda celebration, honoring everything she'd dismissed as outdated. Meanwhile, Amanda's wedding planning proceeded without any meaningful family involvement. She'd created exactly the sophisticated, contemporary celebration she'd claimed to want, but the cost was the disconnection from every tradition that might have made the event feel like a family celebration rather than an expensive party. When she called to complain about various planning stresses, I listened politely but offered no assistance, reminding her that she'd hired professionals specifically to avoid involving family in the planning process. The most satisfying part of my plan involved quietly redistributing all the family heirlooms Amanda had rejected. My grandmother's wedding dress went to my niece Sarah, who appreciated its historical significance and planned to honor our family by wearing it at her own wedding. The Christmas decorations Amanda had called outdated were divided among cousins who understood their sentimental value. The china, linens, and serving pieces that had been intended for Amanda's future entertaining were redirected to family members who would actually use them to maintain our traditions. I also began the legal process of removing Amanda as the primary beneficiary of items she'd already rejected. If she thought our family heirlooms were embarrassing relics, then she shouldn't be burdened with inheriting them. Margaret helped me restructure my will to ensure that family treasures would go to people who valued them rather than to someone who saw them as obstacles to sophisticated living. The changes weren't made in anger but in acknowledgement of Amanda's clearly stated preferences. She'd spent months explaining that our traditions were outdated, our celebrations were unsophisticated, and our approach to holidays was embarrassingly old-fashioned. I was simply ensuring that she'd never have to be embarrassed by our family treasures again, since they'd belonged to people who saw them as precious gifts rather than burdensome obligations. 3 weeks before Amanda's wedding, she called in a panic that surprised me with its intensity. "Mom, I need your help. The wedding planner just canceled. Apparently she double-booked our date with some celebrity client who offered her more money. I have 3 weeks to pull together a wedding for 200 people, and I don't know how to do any of this stuff. Can you please help me figure out how to make this work?" The desperation in her voice was stark, a complete contrast to the confident sophistication she'd maintained throughout the planning process. For months, she'd insisted that professional planners were superior to family involvement, that modern celebrations required expertise beyond what traditional mothers could provide. Now, faced with the reality of creating a meaningful celebration from scratch, she was discovering that all her dismissive comments about old-fashioned planning hadn't prepared her to actually execute a wedding. "Oh, sweetie," I said gently, "I wouldn't want to impose my outdated approaches on your contemporary celebration. You've spent months explaining that our family's traditional way of doing things is embarrassing and unsophisticated. Surely someone with your modern perspective can figure out contemporary solutions without relying on old-fashioned methods. The silence that followed was heavy with the realization that Amanda's rejection of family traditions had left her completely unprepared for this crisis. She'd never learned how to plan celebrations because she'd dismissed the very traditions that might have taught her those skills. Mom, please. I know I said some things about our traditions being outdated, but I really need your help now. I don't know how to coordinate catering, decorations, music, all the details that make weddings work. Amanda, honey, those details are exactly what our family traditions were designed to handle. For 4 generations, the women in our family have been planning weddings that brought families together, created lasting memories, and honored the significance of marriage. But you've made it very clear that our approach is irrelevant to modern life. I don't want to confuse your contemporary vision with outdated family involvement. The conversation that followed was painful for both of us, but necessary for Amanda to understand the consequences of her systematic dismissal of family knowledge. She begged me to help with vendor coordination, timeline management, guest relations, all the skills that traditional mothers and daughters had been passing down through hands-on collaboration during wedding planning. But she'd rejected that collaboration in favor of professional expertise that had just abandoned her. I can try to learn all this stuff from scratch, she said, her voice breaking with stress. But I don't know how you and Grandma and Great-Grandma figured out how to make these big celebrations work. There are so many details, so many things that can go wrong, so many decisions that affect everything else. For the first time in months, she was acknowledging that previous generations might have possessed valuable knowledge rather than just outdated customs. I felt a moment of maternal softening, remembering all the times I'd rescued Amanda from various crises throughout her childhood. But this crisis was different because it was the direct result of her deliberate rejection of the very resources that could have prevented it. Those women figured it out through years of collaboration, learning from each other, building on traditions that had been tested through multiple generations of celebrations. But that knowledge base is exactly what you've been calling outdated and embarrassing. Over the next week, I watched Amanda scramble to assemble a wedding celebration using only the modern, sophisticated approaches she'd insisted were superior to family traditions. She hired caterers without understanding how to coordinate serving times. She selected flowers without considering how they'd work with her venue's lighting. She planned music without thinking about how it would affect conversation during dinner. Every mistake was a natural consequence of rejecting the collaborative planning process that our family had refined over decades of successful celebrations. Meanwhile, word spread through our extended family about Amanda's wedding crisis and my decision not to step in with emergency assistance. The response was interesting and revealing. Some family members thought I was being too harsh, but others understood that Amanda needed to learn the value of family knowledge the hard way. Several cousins offered to help Amanda directly, but she was too embarrassed to accept assistance from the same family members whose contributions she'd been dismissing for months. The most telling moment came when Amanda called her future mother-in-law for advice, only to discover that Richard's family had their own set of traditions that were equally outdated by Amanda's standards. Mrs. Patterson had been planning elegant celebrations for decades, but her approach was built on the same kind of generational knowledge that Amanda had been rejecting in our family. When Amanda tried to explain her contemporary vision, Mrs. Patterson gently suggested that some traditions existed because they actually worked better than modern innovations. 2 weeks before the wedding, Amanda made a desperate decision that revealed how completely she'd underestimated the complexity of celebration planning. She hired a second wedding planner, paying premium rates for someone who could take over the coordination with minimal notice. But this planner's approach was exactly what Amanda had been rejecting. Traditional menu options, classic decoration styles, time-tested coordination methods that prioritized function over fashion. The new planner wants to do everything the old-fashioned way, Amanda complained during one of our increasingly frequent crisis calls. She says there's not enough time to execute contemporary interpretations properly, so we need to fall back on traditional approaches that are proven to work. I'm getting the exact kind of wedding I was trying to avoid. The irony was perfect, but I didn't point it out directly. Instead, I just listened as Amanda described how her sophisticated, contemporary wedding was being transformed into exactly the kind of traditional celebration she'd spent months dismissing. The professional expertise she'd preferred over family involvement was recommending the same approaches our family had been using for generations. The wedding day itself was beautiful but impersonal, a successful event that felt more like an expensive party than a family celebration. Amanda looked stunning in her designer dress, and the professional coordination ensured that everything ran smoothly. But walking through the reception, I noticed what was missing. The personal touches that come from family involvement, the sense of continuity that connects celebrations to previous generations, the feeling of warmth that emerges when traditions are honored rather than replaced. After the ceremony, several family members approached me with comments about how different this wedding felt from previous family celebrations. "It's lovely," my sister Dorothy said diplomatically, "but it doesn't feel like one of our weddings." He was right. Amanda had achieved exactly what she'd claimed to want. A sophisticated, contemporary celebration with no connection to our family's traditional approach to honoring marriage. But the real consequences became apparent during Amanda's first married Christmas. She called me in early December, confused about how to create holiday celebrations in her new home. "Mom, I want to decorate for Christmas, but I don't really know how to make it feel special like our house always did. The stores have all these expensive decorations, but they just look like hotel lobbies, not like homes. How do you make Christmas feel magical instead of just expensive?" The question revealed everything she'd lost by rejecting our family traditions. She'd never learned the skills behind holiday magic because she'd been too busy dismissing the methods that created it. "Amanda, magical Christmas celebrations come from the same place our family traditions came from. Love, patience, attention to detail, and the understanding that the most meaningful decorations are the ones connected to personal memories rather than professional design. Can you teach me how to do that?" she asked hopefully, apparently forgetting that she'd spent years explaining why my approaches were outdated and embarrassing. "I want Richard and me to have the kind of Christmas mornings I remember from childhood, but I don't know how to create that feeling without all the family traditions I rejected." This was the moment I'd been working toward for months. Amanda finally understanding that traditions weren't obstacles to sophistication but foundations for meaning. "Honey, those Christmas mornings you remember weren't created by magic. They were created by decades of accumulated knowledge, carefully preserved decorations, recipes that took years to perfect, and the understanding that holidays are about creating connection rather than impressing people." The conversation continued for over an hour, with Amanda asking detailed questions about holiday planning that she'd never bothered to learn because she'd been too busy rejecting the teaching opportunities I'd offered throughout her life. She wanted to know how to make cookies that tasted like memories, how to decorate in ways that felt personal rather than professional, how to create traditions that would eventually mean something to her own future children. But the damage was already done. I'd spent months redistributing all the holiday decorations, family recipes, and traditional tools that would have made Amanda's transition to married holiday hosting seamless and meaningful. The Christmas stockings I'd hand-stitched were now hanging in my niece Sarah's home. The cookie cutters that had been in our family for 4 generations were being used by cousins who appreciated their history. The china that was meant to serve Amanda's Christmas dinners was now part of Dorothy's holiday table settings. "I gave all those things to family members who wanted them," I explained calmly when Amanda asked about borrowing our traditional holiday supplies. "You made it very clear that our family's approach to holidays was outdated and embarrassing. I didn't want to burden you with old-fashioned decorations and recipes that didn't fit your sophisticated lifestyle." The reality of what she'd lost hit Amanda with devastating force. She'd rejected not just individual traditions but the entire support system that made meaningful celebrations possible. The knowledge, the tools, the accumulated wisdom, the family connections that transform ordinary holidays into magical memories, all of it was gone, redistributed to people who valued it more than she had. Mom, I made a mistake. I didn't understand what I was giving up when I rejected our traditions. Can I have some of those things back? Can you teach me how to create the kind of holidays we used to have? Her voice was breaking with the recognition that some losses can't be easily reversed, that relationships and traditions require ongoing maintenance rather than emergency reconstruction. Amanda, some things can't be given back once they've been rejected. Those family heirlooms are now part of other people's holiday traditions. Those recipes are being used by family members who will teach them to their own children. The knowledge I tried to share with you over the years is still available, but you'll have to start from the beginning instead of building on the foundation I spent decades preparing for you. The final conversation we had about holidays was the most honest we'd had in years. Amanda acknowledged that she'd confused sophistication with superiority, that she'd mistaken tradition for outdated thinking, that she'd undervalued the time and effort required to create meaningful celebrations. She apologized for dismissing our family customs and asked if we could rebuild our relationship around shared holiday planning. But some bridges once burned can't be fully reconstructed. I was willing to have a relationship with Amanda, but it would be different from what we'd had before. She taught me that my traditions were worthless to her, and I'd learned to value them enough not to offer them again to someone who might reject them. The holidays she created would be her own, built from scratch without the foundation I'd spent her lifetime preparing. 5 years have passed since Amanda's wedding crisis, and the holiday seasons have settled into a new pattern that reflects the choices we both made during that difficult period. Amanda has learned to create her own celebrations, building traditions from scratch with varying degrees of success. Some years her Christmas decorations achieve the magazine-perfect sophistication she always wanted. Other years they feel empty despite their professional appearance, lacking the warmth that comes from personal history and family connection. I spend holidays now with the family members who never forgot the value of shared traditions. Dorothy and I have recreated the Christmas celebrations of our childhood, using the decorations and recipes Amanda rejected to create gatherings that honor our family's history while remaining open to new members who appreciate what we've preserved. Sarah, my niece, has become the daughter I thought I was raising, someone who understands that traditions aren't constraints but gifts passed down through generations of women who believed in the importance of marking life's moments with intention and beauty. The saddest part isn't missing Amanda during holidays. It's watching her struggle to create meaningful celebrations without the foundation I spent her childhood building. She calls occasionally with questions about holiday planning, asking for advice about everything from menu coordination to decoration storage. I answer her questions kindly but without the emotional investment I once brought to her celebrations. She rejected the collaborative relationship that makes tradition sharing joyful, so now she receives information rather than involvement. Amanda has children now, 2 little girls who will grow up with whatever traditions their mother manages to create from scratch. I see them occasionally, sweet children who don't understand why their grandmother isn't more involved in their holiday celebrations. Amanda has to explain that Grandma has her own way of doing holidays, without admitting that she rejected Grandma's way so completely that there's no easy path back to shared celebrations. The most revealing moments come when Amanda's daughters ask about family history, wanting to know about the traditions that their friends' grandmothers share with them. Amanda has to answer that our family used to have special ways of celebrating, but she changed things when she got older. She can't explain why she rejected traditions that might have enriched her daughters' childhoods without admitting that she valued sophistication over sentiment, appearance over meaning. But I've also discovered something beautiful in my redirected holiday energy. The family you choose through shared values can be more fulfilling than the family you're born with through shared genetics. The cousins, nieces, and family friends who now gather for our traditional celebrations understand that holidays are about connection rather than perfection, meaning rather than appearance, continuity rather than innovation. They help preserve traditions while adding their own touches, creating the kind of collaborative celebration planning that Amanda rejected. My holiday seasons are full of laughter, preparation, and the satisfaction that comes from maintaining something beautiful across generations. We use my grandmother's china, follow my mother's recipes, and hang stockings that were hand-stitched with love decades ago. The children in our extended family learn the stories behind our traditions, understanding that they're inheriting not just customs but the accumulated love of women who believed that ordinary moments could be transformed into extraordinary memories through careful attention and genuine care. Amanda missed her chance to be part of that continuity. She could have added her own innovations to our traditional foundation, creating celebrations that honored the past while reflecting her personality and values. Instead, she chose to start over completely, rejecting the collaborative process that makes holiday traditions feel meaningful rather than manufactured. Now she gets to live with celebrations that are entirely her own creation, sophisticated, contemporary, and ultimately hollow because they're disconnected from the deeper currents of family history and shared experience. She said our traditions were old-fashioned, outdated, embarrassing obstacles to sophisticated living. She was wrong about their value, but she was right about one thing. Traditions do require ongoing maintenance and collaborative participation. They can't be preserved by people who see them as burdens, and they can't be shared with people who reject their significance. Amanda taught me that some gifts can only be given to people who understand their worth, and that protecting precious things sometimes means keeping them away from people who would damage them through neglect or dismissal. Some losses teach us what we really value. Amanda's rejection of our family traditions taught me that they were worth preserving even if she couldn't appreciate them, worth sharing with people who understood their significance even if my own daughter couldn't, worth maintaining even if the person I'd always imagined passing them to had decided they were worthless. The holidays she wanted, sophisticated, contemporary, disconnected from family history, are exactly what she got. And the holidays I wanted, meaningful, connected, rich with accumulated love, are exactly what I kept, shared now with people who understand that the most precious gifts are the ones passed down through generations of women who believed in the power of tradition to transform ordinary time into sacred celebration.